if you want your child to cooperate, you first need to model cooperation. And that can be really hard because there's this idea of you're gonna have to surrender this concept of like total compliance all the time. Like, I said, you're gonna clean your room, stop talking back, you're gonna do it, right now. And there's this principle that I'm a big believer in, that I coach my clients on. It's called mutual submission. And it just to reiterate, it's you are modeling cooperation and consideration so that your child internalizes that model and those experiences. And on the back end, they reciprocate and give those qualities back to you.
I say this as someone who is strong-willed, who didn't have a parent who was able to nurture her strong-willedness. It can feel really hard to model cooperation when you never got it modeled to you. And that's part of the work that I know you work with your clients on, really getting into why is it that you can't just let it go? Because with strong-willed kids, I've learned you've got to let some things go. Like you said, you're not letting boundaries go, but you've got to just step back and say, ooh, what am I bringing to this fight?
In reality, your child they're going to develop positive behaviors based on how they relate to you. Not necessarily, like you said, there's a time and a place for the explanations, but it's from hitting the boundary repeatedly and mom and dad tolerating certain behaviors. That is how they're going to integrate these positive behaviors. It's not going to be because, when you grow up, are your friends going to want to talk to you if you're cursing, or if you're being no. It's going to be because mom didn't tolerate me cursing, and she expected me to speak like I was allowed to be upset, but I had to express myself in this way. She gave me choices. That is how your child is going to develop and integrate these positive behaviors.
Hello and welcome back to the show. I'm Dr. Mona, a board-certified pediatrician and mom, and host of this show, the Peds Doc Talk podcast, a top 50 parenting podcast in the United States. And thank you so much for being here. Before you go on with your day after this episode, make sure to leave a review or rating, because it's how the podcast continues to grow. I cannot express this enough. If you love this show, you have to show the love. So let's get to it with a returning guest today. He is Zack Kasabo, who is a returning guest that is a certified school counselor and parent coach. And he was on our show chatting about how to encourage positive behaviors in our kids without enabling them. So make sure you listen to that episode too. But today we're talking about mistakes not to make with strong-willed children, and I have one of those. Thank you so much for coming back on the show again, Zack.
Thanks for having me, Mona. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Same. We had a great conversation last time. Like I mentioned, you all have to listen to it, how we approach parenting, just the things that we want you to know. Listen to that episode. But for anyone who may not have listened to that episode or who may not be familiar with your work, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Sure. So my name's Zack. I'm a certified school counselor. I'm right outside of Philadelphia. Right now, I work as a K-8 school counselor, but I have experience with kids from kindergarten to 12th grade. So I have experience with all the different developmental stages. And throughout my experience, I've worked closely with parents, teachers, administrators to make sure that kids are supported and they have what they need. And then I also have a private coaching business where I help parents confidently manage their child's challenging behavior.
I love it. And, like I said, our last episode was just pure joy and pure amazingness. So I cannot wait to chat about this topic, which is about strong-willed children, which I know a lot of parents navigate, and I'm sure you deal with in a school system. And so the first question is, for anyone who's not familiar, like, how do kids, in your opinion, become strong-willed, or why are they? And what are some signs that they may be strong-willed?
Yes. So I want to speak strictly from experience. So just from throughout my career. So there's definitely an inherent piece. So there's some inherent things going on with their disposition, but I do think that the environment either exacerbates the strong-willedness or mitigates it. So one thing to keep in mind is that these kids like to be independent. They like to do things on their own. Sometimes they can be skeptical of authority figures. Now, how do they come to being skeptical? They could completely have misperceived someone's redirection or some interactions. So, it could, mom or dad could be acting completely in good faith, but because of their natural disposition to want to do it by myself, I can do this. they might look at it as like a threat to that autonomy.
Yeah.
So, there's definitely some inherent, the nature aspect. But again, I've seen these kids, when we look at the nurture lens, develop fine and learn how to harness that those strong convictions in appropriate ways. Some signs that you can look for would just be taking longer to be redirected and needing
Hmm.
more time to process situations. So when they're told no, they might need some more time. And we'll talk about how sometimes if they feel as though there's like a shot clock on them for like you have like 10 seconds, they might feel like their freedom's being jeopardized, and that could make
Yeah.
those worse. So, that's something in particular that would be a sign that you might have a strong-willed child.
Yeah, and I love that you start off by saying in your experience, because of course there's no like
Yes.
data or research, because it's a
Yeah.
personality trait. And so that is exactly how I feel too. And then
Yes.
also, I love that sort of nature nurture perspective, right? Some people can just be strong willed personalities, but there is a way that we can nurture those people where it doesn't become their over dominating, where they can't function, that everything is, oh, well, he's just strong willed and he's strong willed. I say that because I am strong willed, like I by
Yes.
nature, and my parents didn't know how to parent a strong-willed child, and I ended up in my adulthood taking that strong-willed, and it affected relationships, it affected how I
Yes.
worked at jobs, and it was a huge thing
Yes.
until I realized how to hone it in as an adult. And so
Mhm.
now I have a 4-year-old who is like me in temperament, and I'm like, I'm and like you said, it's about how am I going to approach him and not let this be a, going back to your enabling behavior, how am I not going to let his strong will just enable and be the narrative where, okay, well, Ryan's just strong willed, he's not going to do
Yeah.
that. No, I'm going to teach him, and we are going to figure out how to work with your personality so that we can actually get you what we need you to do and be a member of society. I mean, that's just what this is.
Yes. I love
um,
that. Something that's awesome that you just said is that, excuse me, is that strong, like there's this idea that it's entirely bad to be strong-willed. Like
mm,
one of the best qualities you can have in a kid is that they feel convicted in what they believe in,
yes, yes.
especially when they hit their teenage years.
I completely agree.
You know?
And I was just going to ask you, like, what do you feel people get wrong about strong-willed? And I think it's kind of like we put these labels on
Mhm.
children: strong-willed, shy, and
Yes.
it's like that we end up in a way when you put these labels on personality traits, it almost makes it feel
Yes.
like it's a negative. When I completely agree, I am a go-getter because of my strong-willedness. I fight for what I believe in, and I think that's such a beautiful thing. And my son will probably do the same thing, you know. But like you said, it's, we don't look at it as a negative. We look at it as, okay, how am I going to take this nature of my child and really work with him? Is there anything else that you feel like parents get wrong about, or people get wrong about strong-willed
Yeah.
kids?
Well, just continuing with that theme is that there's this idea that it could be like a life sentence, like, oh, Johnny's going to be, this is just how he is. He's going to be stubborn. And then, like you said, when that labels, when labels are attached to a kid, that is such an internalizing, it's such an impactful part of their life. And it
Yeah.
just becomes part of that internal dialogue, so not only does mom, dad, teacher, whoever think I'm strong-willed, I must just, this is just how I am, so I'm going to operate within those parameters instead of, no, wait a second, I'm very opinionated, I believe in myself, but I'm still part of society, I'm still part of this family. I still need to find ways to adapt reasonably and in positive ways. So for parents out there, it's not a life sentence. And in fact, I've seen plenty of examples where kids respond in weeks to a month to certain parenting interventions. So,
Right.
if you're a parent and you feel defeated, discouraged, first of all, I empathize with that. It is overwhelming to have a strong-willed child when they're dug in and they're doing their thing. But there are like you said, there are things you can absolutely do to help manage that, where you're not fully eradicating their sense of autonomy, because you don't want to do that. But you're still expecting them to display behaviors within reason. Certain
Hmm.
behaviors within reason. You know.
Yeah, and I'm sure, like you said, there's so many strategies, which we'll kind of get into, like the tip of the iceberg on this conversation. But what would you
Yeah.
say
Yeah.
is the number one rule when addressing strong-willed kids?
Yes. So here's the bottom line: is that if you want your child to cooperate, you first need to model cooperation. And that can be really hard because there's this idea of you're going to have to surrender
Yeah.
this concept of like total compliance all the time. Like, I said, you're going to clean your room, stop talking back, you're going to do it,
Hmm.
right now. And there's this principle that I'm a big believer in, that I coach my clients on. It's called mutual submission. And again, just to reiterate, it's you are modeling cooperation and consideration so that your child internalizes that model and those experiences. And on the back end, they reciprocate and give those qualities back to you. But again, if they don't have that model, if they don't have that compass, don't expect them to make the changes that you're looking for. You can swipe through Instagram all day. You can plug and play these different skills, but if you're not grounded in those principles, like I'm going to be cooperative without
Yeah.
enabling, like there's going to be limits. You know, it always starts with the parent. You know.
It does. And we talked about that in the last episode. And I love that terminology you're using about mutual submission. And it's
Yep.
exactly what I described. I grew up in a house where my dad, it was a very my way or the highway type of parenting style, right? Like, you're not listening, you're
Yep.
going to get punished. There was some
Hmm.
physical, I'm sure a lot of parents can relate to that physical abuse if you didn't cooperate, and stuff that we don't want to
Yep.
do anymore. And like we talked
Right.
about in the last episode, I could go the complete other way and say, well, let me just let him, our son, do whatever he wants. But no, it's a balance of, I'm not going to put my hand on my child, but I'm also going to have this sort of modeling of the cooperation. And I say this as someone who is strong willed, who didn't have a parent who was able to nurture her strong willedness. It can feel really hard to model cooperation when you never got it modeled to you. And that's part of the
Yes.
work that I know you work with your clients
Mhm.
on, really getting into why is it that you can't just let it go? Because with strong willed
Mhm.
kids, I've learned
Yep.
you've got to let some things go. Like you said, you're not letting
Yes.
boundaries go, but you got to
Yes.
just step back and say, ooh, what am I bringing to this fight? Because it is, you get into a power struggle because you're just wanting to get your point across, when it's a 4-year-old, it's a 7-year-old. They don't have the cognitive
Yep.
development, and it's not going to go anywhere.
Right. Thank you for sharing your experience. And I'm sorry that that happened. And I think that's another great point, that, and we talked a lot about this on the last episode, but just parents being mindful that there's a balance, and it's natural to want to kind of swing completely in the other direction. But that is having, as we're seeing in schools and throughout society, there's lots of unintended consequences that we're experiencing now.
Yeah.
So really aiming for that balance, and part of the balance is overcoming those generational components that were passed down that you might not even be aware of. And if you're not sure what to do, like, it's having the humility to be like, I don't know, like, who can, consult with a friend first. You don't have to go right to an expert. Like, talk to a friend and see what's working for them or what's not working for them. But I do think, just having some grace and some empathy for yourself, and this is an area I'm struggling in. Clearly what I'm doing isn't working, so taking that responsibility instead of putting it all on your child. Something needs to change here.
Yeah.
I do just to make the mutual submission, because it's very abstract, just to make it a
Hmm.
little more clear for your listeners. Uh, so what it typically, and I'll lay out an example, but it typically looks like, for the parent, surrendering the idea of total compliance, and the child surrendering the idea of total defiance.
Hmm.
So the end result's the same, but the way in which you get to the end might look a little different. So, for example, parent says clean your room, child says no. Some parents might want to get into a power struggle right away. The next step, you might empathize. I know you don't want to clean your room. You need to clean your room.
Hmm.
So, given that opportunity, showing them that you're emotionally available, maybe they come back at you again. Maybe you give them one more opportunity again, and modeling cooperation, repeating the expectation with some empathy. They're still battling you. You give them some choices, with one of them being a consequence, and then you surrender the idea of complete control and you let them choose.
Yeah.
So again, you're not giving up the expectation about the room needs to be clean. It's just the way in which you get there might look a little different.
And what other practical strategies can parents use to address that? And if you want to use the cleaning of the room as an example, since we were already talking about that, what else would you add
Yeah.
to that?
Yeah. So I have a video about this on you can find it on my social media. But and this can tie into the mutual submission, but step one would be instead of attacking them and them making their wall stronger would be just to
Yeah.
find a way to acknowledge them. All right. So the idea is that strong-willed kids sometimes naturally they put a wall up right away before a conversation's even had because in their mind my autonomy is being threatened. Mom and dad don't get me, so I'm not even going to hear them out. So one way that you protect your boundary without negotiating or debating is you just empathize. Like this is tough. I understand this is tough, but and you follow up with that what is expected of them, and then after you're what so I call that like getting behind their wall with them. So literally like taking on their perspective, having the empathy instead of jumping right down to like you need to do it now. I don't want
Yeah.
to hear it. Uh, After that, giving them the freedom to choose, and I think this is where parents get caught up because you and I had talked about before how we're doing a good job with the empathy. I think a lot of parents are, um,
Yeah.
but if they're not responding to that, you got to be mindful that the longer that this thing plays out, the more likely it's going to reoccur in the future. So you need to be very intentional with how long you're choosing to interact with your child in these situations. So after you've acknowledged them, the next step would be to give them choices. And after you give them a choice, you have to give them time to process. So strong-willed kids, again, a lot of it's about autonomy and freedom. If you if you give them choices and it's like, you need to choose now, sometimes again they feel like that freedom is threatened and
Right.
then they start questioning the empathy in the first place. They didn't really mean the empathy because they just got behind my wall and made me do it right away. So now, is there a time and a place where it's like you got a couple seconds? Absolutely. But if you're talking about like significant, like really strong, like kids that dig in, and this becomes like you know, it could be for parents. Some parents have said it could be like an hour. You know, they might need a couple minutes where you let them go, and then you let them decide. Um, they need that space. And then going back to the rules with the strong-willed kids, with the first one being it's really important to model the cooperation. The second one is you're like get rid of the idea of lecturing as being a meaningful way of um, inspiring change. They need
Yes.
to learn from experience. That
Yeah.
is how a strong-willed child learns. They learn from
Yeah.
the experience, not from the lecture, because going back to like being independent and like naturally being a little skeptical, like they believe what they think is true. So until they consistently hit that boundary that mom or dad sets over and over and over again, you know that is when they're going to internalize that mom and dad's message. It's not from mom and dad saying because I said so. That was a
Yeah.
long-winded answer, but yeah.
Oh, it's a great one. Yeah, and exactly this,
Yeah.
and I love how you ended it with that because I said so. Like, because that is something that I think a lot. That's what I grew up with. And again, when you are strong-willed and that's all you heard, and you're trying to undo that now for a kid, I it feels because it's what you're used to, and I think a lot of parents want to be that authority figure, and they think that lecturing is a good thing. And don't get me wrong, we have to teach our children, and they have to learn
Yes.
by sometimes
Hmm.
lecturing, but we know that there's a way to do it and a time to do it, and maybe we can have a whole episode on how to lecture like like
Yes.
how to
Yeah.
actually teach our children things that they want, because I think one of the biggest things I see about that, the issues, is that we try to lecture them when they're dysregulated. We know that that's not going to
Yep.
go anywhere, and then we really
Hmm.
just try to lecture a child that may not be developmentally appropriate, right? I mean, you got to understand that a
Yes.
2.5-year-old, 3-year-old is not going to understand the cognitive ability why we can't do something, right? Like you said, they need to learn
Yep.
through maybe a related consequence, or maybe through
Yep.
repetition. But that's
Hmm.
so hard. And me and you have the educational background and also the experience to kind of get child development, and you also have worked with so many different ages, and myself included, to understand,
Yeah.
well, this isn't going to work for maybe a younger child and an older child, but that we got to get into that mindset of, what are, again, going back to the other episode, what are my principles, what is it that
Right.
I'm going to model here, and then why am I not going to really lecture at this point, and what can I do instead?
Yes, I love it. That's all great. Yeah, it's just I think it's natural for us, especially when we feel like it's personal. Like that,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's when the lecture really comes out because it's like you're
Yeah.
not like I'm validating you. You're not acknowledging my perspective, and then it goes into like to that thing where in reality, your child they're going to develop positive behaviors based on how they relate to you. Like you said, there's a time and a place for the explanations, but not it's from hitting the boundary repeatedly and mom and dad tolerating certain behaviors. That is how they're going to integrate these positive behaviors. It's not going to be because, when you grow up, are your friends going to want to talk to you if you're cursing or if you're being,
Yeah.
no. It's going to be because mom didn't tolerate me cursing, and she expected me to speak like I was allowed to be upset, but I had to, express myself in this way. She gave me choices. That is how your child is going to develop and integrate these positive behaviors.
Yeah, that taking it personal, I think that's a huge detriment, and I get
Yeah.
that feelings are going to be involved. This is human interaction, and I kind of describe it with adult relationships, right? We tend to take things like with our partner, for example, maybe a little too personal,
Yes.
and really not getting to the core of what are the belief systems that we have in this moment that are causing us to feel this way, and how can we
Yep.
better communicate. I relate a lot of my parenting advice to adult relationships, and I know children are not developed as well as adults in terms of brain development, but the concepts are
Yeah.
there, not to take it
Yes.
personal, not to lecture during dysregulation. If I'm upset and my
Yep.
husband starts to lecture me, well, you shouldn't have done that. As we know with children, it's going to fall on deaf ear. It's like you need to
Yep.
meet them where they need to be met. So, yeah, I relate to
Yeah.
this, and I think it's such great advice. Is there any other like final message you would want to add about, parents of strong-willed children?
Yes. So one thing, just to give everyone a full disclosure, is you really want to get on top of this before the middle of elementary school.
Yeah,
Now, even before grade school is best, but this is unfortunately what happens is that when kids hit about fourth grade, and there's these huge developmental uh huge bursts of growth cognitively, physically, and they start to naturally, if they're in school, they start to naturally gravitate towards what their peers think
yeah,
of them, and they become more impressionable. And when that shift happens, mom and dad start to slowly lose some authority,
hmm
and it can make these things, these trying to change behaviors more difficult, because instead of looking up to mom and dad as like the primary person that they're trying to work with and appease, now it might be more so, what does my classmate think? So if you are, and I get a lot of questions about this, if you find yourself in middle school, high school, and you and you feel behind, the same principles apply. It just takes longer for the child to adapt to them.
yeah,
So it's super discouraging, I know, because now you have a 2-year-old tantrum, not tantrum, but what once was a strong-willed 3 4-year-old in a grown child's body, which can feel very overwhelming, and for some parents it can feel scary if it's escalated
yeah.
to something more extreme. So really, really, excuse me, try to get on top of of these things, but hopefully before grade school. You know?
Oh, I think it's a reasonable thing. I mean, I
Yeah.
have this, I tell a lot of my patients and a lot of my followers that just because things may be seemingly normal, or that, okay, it might be a
Yes.
phase, like let's use tantrums, for example. A lot of
Yep.
families are told tantrums are normal. So picky eating is normal, but there are things that we can do in that phase that so it doesn't become permanent, like you mentioned at the beginning of this episode, that it doesn't
Yes.
become strong-willed is who I am and I can't do anything else, and it impacts schooling and relationships and things like that. Because I don't like that narrative that just because it's normal, quote unquote, in
Yeah.
children, that we don't do anything about it. And it's like a big gripe of mine, because a lot of pediatricians will say that too, right? Like, oh, yeah,
Mhm.
picky eating is normal. Yeah, sleep regressions are normal. Da 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 is normal. Absolutely, it's typical. But that doesn't mean that we don't do anything about it, just like you said. And so, again, another wonderful conversation. I said it already in the last episode, but if we want to start a podcast, we can, because I could talk to you all
Just
day about
yeah,
this stuff. No, I'm joking, but
yeah.
I wish I had time for that. But like, it's just so nice. I love your perspective. So thank you so much. Where can people go for more information about your resources and to stay connected?
Yeah, sure. So you can find me on Instagram and TikTok at Coach Kasabo, and on Facebook you can just search Kasabo Behavior Management, and then my website is coachkasabo.com, and that would be a
Wonderful.
resource for parents who are looking for ways to help learn how to manage their child's behavior with confidence.
Yes, and definitely give him a follow at the very least on social. You are going to learn so much there. And again, get that advanced, resources if you need it. Again, thank you so much for joining me. This was a pleasure to have you, and it was a great conversation.
I appreciate it. Let's do it again, Mona.
Yeah, and for everyone listening, make sure you listen to our other episode where we talk about how to encourage positive behaviors without enabling our children. And if you loved this episode or that one, please, like I said at the beginning, make sure you leave a review, a rating, because it's how the podcast continues to grow so I can continue to bring amazing guests onto the show. And I cannot wait to chat to another guest next time.